Hey guys, and welcome to the next video in the series that covers the June 2022 exam paper. What we're going to be looking at in this video is the area of queries and reports, which covers activity 3. We're going to start off our queries and reports area by looking at activity A within the question itself, where we've got to create a query that displays an alphabetically sorted list of positions that have at least 2 members of staff currently in the position. It must also show, or must show, the name of the position and the number of staff members only. So this is going to be one of the easier of the two queries that we have to create in this activity. So the first step that we need to do is actually get into the query design. So we do that by clicking on the option for create, and then we're going to click on the design query or query design button in our ribbon. What should happen is we should be displayed with an area where we have a grey area with nothing in it, and then on the right hand side we should see that we have an option for add tables. This should display all of the tables that are in our database that we created earlier on in video 1. So what we need to do here is we need to select the right table for our query. If you don't see this table add element down here, what you can do is you can click on the Add Tables option inside your ribbon, and that should display the little pop out on the right hand side for you. So the tables that we're most interested in this instance is going to be for tables position and the table staff position. Notice the link between the two tables here is showing the one-to-many. This is going to be important because obviously we want to get all of the IDs of the members of staff that are in a certain position so that we can do a count on them later on. The area where we start to play around with the content is down the bottom here. This is where we can customize how our query is going to look, what information we're going to be pulling from the tables, and any rules or sorts or ascending elements that we need to do is get done in this area here. So the first thing we need to do is add a field from our tables. We can do that in a number of ways. The first way that we can do is just simply clicking on the option for drop down here and then choosing the table in the field area. You can drag it from the area into this field, or the way that I prefer is actually just clicking on the field directly in the table areas up here. So the first one that we're going to need to have is going to need to be the table position, because remember we need to sort and show the positions that are inside of this table. So double click on that and that should add that down the bottom. So the next field that we're going to create, we're actually going to create our own. And what we do is we can type in the number or num and then staff. Once we set a colon after that, what happens is when we run our query, the heading above the content underneath will be num staff. But what we want to do is we want to target a specific ID, and we're going to target the specific ID of position ID. And in this instance, I've put an underscore between position and ID. So once we've done that, we then need to add another function to our properties element down here. And this is going to allow us to count the number of values that are displayed inside of our query. So in order for us to achieve that, we need to go up to the ribbon, and you'll notice there's a backwards E or a Roman numeral E that we click that says totals. Once we click on that, you'll see that we have an option, an extra option down here for totals, and the options by default are group by. What we want to do is click inside here and choose from the drop down count. This is going to count the number of positions that are available inside of our database tables. If we was to run that and see what that looks like now, you'll see that we've got the count option working here. It's showing us all of the positions that we have available, and we can see, as I say, we've got 1 manager, 2 office assistants, 1 manager, 2 salespeople, and 3 vending machine operators. So let's get back into the design view. We're not quite finished here with this query. The next bit we need to do is we need to set that this is going to be greater than equal to 2, because we've been asked to show only the positions where it has at least 2 members. So in order for us to do that, we set criteria inside of our query, and we're going to use the arrow for greater than, the equal sign, and the number 2. So what we're saying here is it can be the value of 2, because we're equaling it to, but also we can do values that are greater than 2 as well. If we now run that, notice we have omitted the ones where we only had one person in it, which was the manager. So we're showing here that we have an office assistant, a salesperson, and a machine operator. Now we've got to be careful because this is showing people that have held that position and they might not necessarily be a current member of staff. So what we do is go back into our design view and we're going to add another field. But this time we're going to add the field and then we're not going to show it. So you can see here we've got this option box here where it says show, and we could untick and unselect them. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to get the field information to show only the people that are employed? Well, what we need to do is get the position end date. This should show only the people that are currently employed, because only the people that are employed are not going to have an end date. So how do we do that? How do we get it so that it only looks for people where there is no end date? So as we created our database structure earlier on in tasks 1 and 2, we used the is not null value in some of our criteria. What that meant, just as a recap, is that we cannot allow someone to not put a value inside of that area. It has to have a value. Well, it can work in reverse. Because we don't want a value in the end date, we want current members of staff. What we can do in our criteria is we can actually apply is null, because we are happy for it to have no value. So we're going to put in here is null, and then we're going to run our query. Now notice the other 2 field areas have now disappeared. That's because they had people that were either employed and left or changed a role. So what we've got now is we can see that we've got our vending machine operator and we have the number of 3 people that are current members of staff in that position. But we're also showing here the position end date. We don't want to do that. So as I said earlier on, we're just going to select the show option and deselect it, and then we're going to run. And now we've created the required element of our query A. So what you're going to need to do when it comes to presenting your evidence for something like this, you're going to show the output view of your query, and you're also going to show your design view of your query. So next we're going to click on X. We're going to save this by clicking on yes, and we're going to give it a prefix of QRY underscore, and then you could call it query A. So now we're going to move on to the next of our 2 queries, and this one is normally the more trickier of the 2. So we may need to use some form of calculation or additional field areas that aren't necessarily inside of our database, and use calculations and present those findings. So let's make a start on query B. We've been asked to create a query where staff members currently employed can receive bonus payments. If they've worked for the company for at least 3 years, their bonus will be £1,000, and if they've worked for the company for less than 3 years, their bonus should be £200. So in our query, we've been asked to calculate the number of years worked, the bonus, and display, most importantly here it's telling us what we must display, the staff surname, the staff start date, the number of years worked, and the bonus. So let's jump into our query and go to create and query design. As we did in query A, we're going to need to drag in the tables that are most important to us at this point. So we're going to use this staff table, and we're going to be okay with all of the field areas in here because we won't necessarily need any other tables. The first thing we've been asked to do is present the staff surname. So let's add staff surname to our query design. Then we've been asked to include the staff's start date. So let's add that as well. So we go down here, staff start date, and add that one. The next field area where we've got to work out the number of years worked is where we're going to use the first of our calculations, but also the first of our fields where we don't actually have a field area inside of our database tables. And in this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to create a field that calculates the years worked. So as we did in query A, we're just going to put years worked. And then as soon as we put a colon, that obviously denotes that that's going to be our heading. And then we're going to go into our calculation. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare that this is an integer. So we're going to type in int. That declares that the content that's going to be displayed is going to be an integer value or a number. Then we're going to open our brackets and we're going to type in another bracket. And this time we're going to put date. Now what happens here is the database itself will look for the current system date. So I'm just going to put some parentheses at the end of that. And then once it's got that date, it's going to follow a calculation where it's going to subtract and it's going to get the value that we've got inside of our database field, our database field of staff start date. So I'm going to type in a square bracket staff underscore start underscore date, and then close the square bracket. So as I say, that's going to go and grab the value from the actual field area of when that staff member started, and it's going to subtract it from the date that it is now. So we're not quite finished our calculation, but we do have to close off our curly rounded bracket because we're going to put in a division, because remember we're going to have to divide the number that comes out of that calculation of start date and date by 365 days. However, there is a slight area here where you need to be careful, and I'm going to put in the 365 days, but we do know that every 4 years there's a leap year. So we're going to put in 0.25 because that should allow us then to weigh off the 4 years of where we have normal and then we hit that extra day. Okay, so we're going to just round off the brackets and then that should be our formula done for this one. What we're going to do, as we always do, is we're just going to just check by running this and see if that's actually worked out as a whole number. And we can see here, yep, we've got a nice 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, and 3 years. So we're getting to where we need to be with this query. What we're going to do is go back into the design view and we're going to work out the bonus. So what we want to do is we're going to, as we did before, put a heading for bonus, because inside of our brief it asks us to identify what bonus they're going to get. So I'm going to type in bonus and put colon, so there's my heading. And then we're going to use what's known as an if statement. So if the value is greater than a certain value, then show this, else show another value. So we're going to go and type in if, and then open up our parentheses, our brackets, and then we're going to capture our first value. So we're going to go and get the values that were stored inside of years worked, which is the one just next door to it that we just made. So we're going to go and get the value that's stored inside of here. So years worked. And then we're going to close a square bracket. And then we're going to do greater than and equal to 3. So if the years and worked are greater than and equal to 3, then, so we're going to do a then with a comma, we're going to set the value to be 1,000. Else, so we're going to put a comma, so that's our option for adding the value for else, 200. And then we're going to close that bracket. So let's make sure that we're showing that. Just check on the option there for show. Oh, we've got an issue here with our parentheses. We've got a problem with something that we've typed in. Now that could be that I've added an additional bracket, or it could be that I have missed a bracket. So when you do your bug testing for your actual queries themselves, just make sure that you are clear as to exactly what you have typed. Now I can see that I've put in bonus, if, years worked. Have I missed the bracket? I can see there that I've missed the square bracket at the beginning of years worked, so I'm just going to put that in there now. And then hopefully, when we run it, we can see that that's worked fine. Everybody's on 3 years and over, and that there should be £1,000. But we're still not quite there yet. We've still not finished our query, because what we need to do is make sure that they've not left. We don't want to give people a bonus if they've left, because they're not working for us anymore. So we go back into the design view, and we're just going to put in here that the staff leaving date. So we're going to choose staff leaving date or end date, and we're going to use, like we did before, we're going to just uncheck it. We don't need to show this. We're going to put in is null. We're going to run that. So we've hopefully got rid of some of the people that don't work for us anymore. But we've got another element that we need to do. Inside the query, it asks us to make sure that we're only giving bonuses to those people that have got an excellent grade performance, so that their performance grade is number 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to add that option for us as well. Now, as you can see, I don't have that inside of this table. Some of you may, some of you may not. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag over the staff position, because I put it into here. Because we've got the link here, that should allow us to pull through the information for staff performance grade ID. So if I add that now, and then set the value to be 1, because we only want to have people that are excellent and outstanding. If I now run that, notice we've now rationalized down to a few people where their grade performance is a 1, and that they should be getting their £1,000 bonus. But remember, inside the question, it did ask us not to display anything other than the staff surname, so this one here, the staff start date, the number of years that they've worked, and their bonus. So this doesn't need to be seen. So we're going to go back into the design view, and we're just going to uncheck it here. So what we should now have is a record that shows the following. So we can see there that these values are okay. Now I'm just going to check my calculation for the years worked, just to make sure that I'm not giving anybody any extra bonus, because at the moment everybody looks like they're getting £1,000. Now, for some of you that are doing this activity, you may notice that there is a slight difference to maybe something that your teacher has shown you. In the values will be 5, 5, 5 and 3 on your version that you're using now, or if you're doing this in a year's time, it's going to be 6, 6 and 4. At the time of the exam, this was 4, 4, 4 and 2. So the value for Guy would have been 200. So because we're pulling through the date of now, at whatever time you're doing this example, you may find that the values may increase to what you're expecting in terms of the actual output. So please be careful when it comes to doing this query. But what we can do is we can test it. We can make the start date to be a year later. So rather than being 2019, we can do it as 2020. Now we can see there that Guy, now, because it was a year later that he started, his value is going to be 200. So let's make it a year later for all of them, and we can see that everybody above that should be on the £1,000. So this is more reflective of what you'd expect if you was doing the exam, obviously, in 2022. So now that we've got all those values in, and we've not confused ourselves, hopefully, we can see here that actually we've achieved what is required from us in the actual query for part B. We've been asked to present the staff surname, the staff start date, the number of years worked, and the bonus, which we've got. As I said, if you're doing this query at any other point beyond today or last year, you may notice that your years worked values will be incremented by a year. What you need to do, just increase the staff start date by a year, just to make sure that you've got at least one person that is within 2 years. And that concludes the query side of things for the first part of your question 3.